Hey, what's up, guys? It's Jeremy from the regenreport.com, and I've got some interesting regulatory news. So, two Florida Republicans just introduced two separate bills to allow umbilical stem cell therapy in Florida. So, the bills are on my site. I'll put a link at the bottom of this if you want to download them. They're about 7, 8 pages. They're not too tough to get through, and they're pretty interesting. So, what exactly are they doing here? The question is, are stem cells legal in the US? And the answer is yes and no, depending on the source and what you do with them and how you use them. There's a lot of gray lines that haven't been set. The precedent hasn't been set on various stem cell therapies, but some precedents have been set. So, what's allowed and what's not allowed? There's two types of stem cell sources. So there's autologous, meaning it's coming from your own body. That's where they'll take bone marrow out of your hip. They'll drill into your hip, take bone marrow out, concentrate it, and that contains your own stem cells, both blood stem cells and mesenchymal stem cells, which can help heal ligaments, musculoskeletal, typically stuff, and sometimes can help heal nerves as well. Whereas allogeneic, the other stem cell source, is coming from someone else's body. So you can do a couple things with you can find stem cells in a couple of sources allogeneically, I guess would be the term. One would be using donors' bone marrow concentrate, and this is done by a company called Celco Labs. You may have seen this like longevity influencer Brian Johnson. He did this. So it's a Swedish stem cell company. They will take donor bone marrow, they will expand it, meaning they multiply the stem cells in them, and stem cells can grow kind of like bacteria. You can do what's called culture expansion, put them in the right conditions, and they will multiply and multiply. You get a lot more stem cells, a higher dosage that way. And then they'll re-inject that into they'll inject that all throughout your joints and nerves and muscles and stuff. And that's what this guy did. He didn't post about the results, but he did it. It was in the Bahamas maybe about a year ago. So allogeneic, you can take other people's bone marrow and then inject that into you. Or you can use perinatal products, and those are the tissues surrounding the baby. So the bill will not allow for fetal stem cells, which could be really, really potent cells. But there's obviously the ethical dilemma of aborting a fetus, and I don't think anybody really wants to get into that realm. So the bill explicitly says no fetal stem cells allowed. I'd be surprised if that ever gets allowed in the U.S. No time, never. It's not coming anytime soon, I should say. But there are other tissues surrounding the baby that are typically discarded that also contain stem cells as well. So that would be the amniotic fluid, and that would be the umbilical cord, which is the most common source of stem cells. And that's what everybody's flying down to Mexico, Panama, Colombia are for what's called Wharton's jelly. So here is an umbilical cord cross section cut. You've got the arteries here, and they've got a vein here. Surrounding all this is a jelly structure called Wharton's jelly. So both the blood in the arteries and this Wharton's jelly is rich in mesenchymal stem cells, and they're young, they're fresh, they haven't been exposed to toxins in the environment and stress and all these things. Um, and there are some theoretical advantages of using Wharton's jelly derived stem cells over your own autologous bone marrow concentrate stem cells. And it's all up for debate. Wharton's jelly is even newer than bone marrow concentrate, and it's all so new and most of it's preclinical, and we don't quite know how to harness it yet. But here's why they want to do that. So, I mean, the question is, if you already have stem cells in your body, why would we want to use umbilical cords? Um, well, for one, I've had the bone marrow concentrate procedure done twice, and it's not fun. It's not fun getting your hip drilled into it. You're usually asleep. I tell them the more the better, anesthesia wise, and I don't remember either one, but it does hurt when you wake up. And if your procedure also requires you to be put under, that means you have to be put under, woken up for a couple hours, and then put under again. And that second time you wake up, it sucks. It's invasive, it hurts, and two anesthesias in a day, you feel like absolute crap. So if I could avoid that, I would. But the cells would also need to be at least on par with bone marrow concentrate, and that's the to be debated side of this. But here's some theoretical advantages of umbilical cord products over bone marrow concentrate. So if you look at the research, bone marrow itself contains a very small fraction of stem cells. So this says mesenchymal stem cells in bone marrow usually occupies about 0.001% of total nucleated cells. So my last bone marrow procedure, I had 2 billion total cells in the bone marrow they took out. But that's not all stem cells, obviously. If we take 0.001% of that had about 20,000 mesenchymal stem cells. But there's also other factors here. There's the growth factors, cytokines, other sort of healing goodness that comes from your own bone marrow concentrate. So this isn't the entire story, but if we're talking about mesenchymal stem cell therapy, it's a pretty small fraction. Additionally, I'm 32 years old, so those are 32-year-old cells, and I've had a lot of, toxins and hot pockets and smog and stuff throughout my life. So theoretically, those cells are kind of containing some of that stuff, but we don't quite know. And I did this at a company called Regenix, which is one of the biggest autologous companies on the planet. And I have objective evidence that it did help me, and I was treated really well. So nothing but respect for Regenix. And there's also some other advantages to potential perinatal products that they are not allowed to use. And that's a whole topic for another day. But in Florida, they want to use, again, the umbilical cord products. And why would you do that? So if you go to if you go to Mexico, Panama, Colombia, you're not going to get 20,000 stem cells. You're going to get more like 50 million, 100 million, or more. You can actually control the dosage because you can only aspirate so much bone marrow at one time. Whereas you can manufacture as many umbilical cord stem cells as you really want, and you can up and down the dosage. Um, and the argument from the allogeneic stem cell companies are that these are fresh. They're from a baby, so they're brand new. They haven't been exposed to toxins and stresses and environment and all that stuff. The argument by the autologous stem cell companies um, are going to be that these could get rejected by your body. And the research goes back and forth on that, but potentially your cells could attack those stem cells thinking it's an invader. Um, and generally, there's just way more research on autologous stem cell therapy because it's been around for a lot longer. And we have a couple of big corporations, Regenx, QC Kinetics, that have deployed that across the country and been taking solid data on that for, over a decade. Whereas Wharton's jelly allogeneic stuff is all brand new. So we just don't know yet. But nonetheless, that's what Florida wants to do. They want to let people use allogeneic stem cell therapy. So they say no fetal stem cells and no adipose stem cells, which is where they take your fat out, and that also contains stem cells. And they don't want either one of those. But they will allow the umbilical stem cell therapy, like the Wharton's jelly, amniotic fluid, more than likely, and probably exosomes. That wasn't explicitly mentioned. There's a couple of rules. For one, it has to be ethically derived. So, again, when you have a normal C-section, it can't be from an abortion, is what I'm saying. From a normal C-section, healthy baby that you're already going to throw that stuff away, we could just take that and that would be ethically derived, so we can make stem cells out of that. You cannot manipulate the cells either. So minimal manipulation is the term that you'll hear a lot in the stem cell industry. What that means is they're trying to minimize the risk profile because it's already a risky situation. We don't quite know what these cells do long term. And when you take those cells and you grow them in a lab, which is called culture expanding, you can multiply the stem cells over and over and over. We don't quite know exactly what that does to their safety and efficacy. So in Mexico, Latin America, they do these. They're called, each time you do that, it's called a passage. Each time that you grow the stem cells over and over, it's called a passage. When you do four or more passages, it's said that they become a lot less effective. And again, we don't quite know the safety profile on this stuff either. So they're not allowing you to expand the stem cells at all. And additionally, there's some small details on how you manufacture the stem cells that may or may not be allowed. So you can separate that Wharton's jelly from the umbilical cord using like a mechanical process, meaning you just kind of pull it out. Um, or you can use what's probably easier is an enzyme to break down, the outer layer of the umbilical cord and everything else, and just leave with the Wharton's jelly. Enzymes do alter cells, and that might add to the safety problems too. So maybe that won't be allowed. So it's going to be a lot of ifs and buts happening along the way, but you can't manipulate them. That's open for interpretation. It must be applied by a licensed physician within their own scope, and it must be made in an FDA certified lab with proper GMP standards, which are good manufacturing practices. It's the FDA standard for making drugs and orthobiologics and such. They also need to be registered with one of these four organizations, and physicians must give notices to patients. So it says that they have to put like a poster up around the clinic, kind of like those OSHA posters. They need to put disclaimers on their advertising, and patients need to sign a consent form, which has some details like the anticipated results, the nature of the treatment, alternatives to that treatment, and potential risks and complications. So we'll see what happens with this. If it goes forth, then clinics will be allowed to use this starting in July 1st. This isn't the first state to do this, by the way. Utah and I believe Nevada, Arizona, maybe Louisiana have all done something similar too. Utah, most recently and kind of most famously, they did the exact same thing last year, and this has been already in action for about a year. There's already companies that are doing this. I believe that they can expand stem cells in Utah, but I'm not quite sure. So, this goes totally against what the FDA's guidelines are, and it's a really interesting time for this to happen because last year the feds lost the Chevron deference, which in short gave the federal three-letter organizations like DEA, FDA, CDC, all these things, a lot more power in court. But now they lost that as of last year. So generally, feds are a little bit weakened. And obviously, Bobby Kennedy is now the boss of the FDA. So he's Secretary of Health. Wow, I've never seen really old pictures of him. But he's now the Secretary of Health who watches over the NIH that does our research, the FDA, which regulates our food and drugs, obviously. And he has mentioned that he is down for stem cell therapy, at least finding out what it could possibly do. So the boss of the FDA, is pro stem cells. They lost the Chevron deference. Typically, when laws change like this and it's like a state versus federal thing, you might find this landing in some sort of courtroom, and they'll set a precedence. They'll have one big giant court case to set the goalpost, and that happened with autologous therapy. In 2012 or so, Regenexx fought the FDA to expand autologous therapies, and they ultimately lost. And now that set the goalpost for all future autologous stem cell therapy. Now, nobody in the country can expand that stuff because of this court case. And we haven't really seen a ton of that for this. I mean, maybe we'll see this happen in the courtroom. I'm surprised it hasn't happened in Utah yet. But once it does, it will set that precedent, and we'll find out. I would consider myself a stem cell accelerationist. I would like it to work, and I'd like us to have more therapies, but at the same time, it needs to be done in a really safe, controlled manner with qualified physicians, a qualified lab, and clearly there's a demand for the product. People want to know if it works, and people want to figure out if we can actually harness this stuff and solve, some giant problems in the world. But we truly don't know yet. And so my fear is that this gets deployed in Florida, harms a bunch of people. Maybe some bad actors get in on this, and the FDA shuts down the whole party because bad news spreads really fast. Or it just doesn't work in general. We're just off on the wrong path, and I need to shut my website down. So we don't know. Maybe it goes great, and we'll see. So, anyways, if you like this sort of reporting, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. I also do a weekly newsletter. If you go to the regenreport.com and hit subscribe, you can just throw your email in there, and I'll send you all the news, videos like this, and who's going through trials for stem cell therapy and all that stuff. So, thanks for watching.